Okay, this is the still life that we have set up in the classroom. I took a picture of it for the demonstration here. Wanted to give you some helpful tips on how to begin to draw a still life. Normally you're going to be looking at the life objects, not a picture. So the first thing would be, I would pick an area that you want to study. You don't have to study the whole entire thing. I say pick 3 because in art there's that rule of odds. Things that are an odd number generally are more interesting to look at rather than even numbers. So I'm going to pick these 3 objects right here: the kettle, the pumpkin, and the skull. Got a couple corn stalks going through. Second rule or tip, I guess, would be to zoom in or crop down. What this means basically is that you want to draw big. You don't want these things to be floating in a sea of space. You want to draw, them a good size. I'm going to go on a horizontal format here, and I'm going to make these really big so that they fit well. This is a compositional thing. I want these things to all fill up the space really well. So that brings us to the fourth part, which is just estimate. Where are these things going to land and how big are they going to have to be? And then you're going to need to pay particular close attention to the proportion and the perspective in the beginning of the drawing. So with the kettle, I'm estimating it landing about over here. The pumpkin going to be a little bit lower and kind of to the left of the center of the composition, and the skull is going to be over here on the right. I'm zooming in here. I'm going to start with the number 2 pencil, really light, and this would be more of a intuitive gesture type of drawing, so I'm just very roughly, I think I'm going to target the pumpkin first just for demonstration here. Again, where is that going to land in my composition? Kind of towards the bottom and left. Another tip, don't bottom out. In other words, what that means is if you're going to be drawing these objects, don't put the bottom of the front object at the bottom of your paper. A lot of beginning drawing students will make that mistake. They'll draw that pumpkin. If that was the closest thing to them, they would make the bottom of the paper the bottom of their view of the drawing. Don't do that. That's a big no-no. You want there to be a sense of space. You want to draw the viewer's eye in a little bit. So I folded the paper here. That's going to be the bottom of my paper. I'm going to leave a gap. So putting the bottom of that pumpkin about right here will be much, much better. And it's a pretty simple shape, kind of a roundish shape. Shouldn't be too hard to capture that. I'll use that as kind of my basic unit to compare stuff to. This is where you want to start paying close attention to the proportion and the perspective. So perspective-wise, I've got a little angle here of the cloth. How do I capture that angle? Well, remember, you need to compare it to what doesn't change. The horizontal does not change. The vertical does not change. Whatever you need to do to see this as an angle right there to capture that angle correctly. The skull actually does touch the side of the pumpkin right there. So there's a simple understanding of contours of how stuff relates. It's very close edge there. Here's a proportional comparison. How high up does the skull go? If I drew a line directly over from the top of the skull, where does it run in relation to the pumpkin? You can see if I took a measurement on the pumpkin, about half of it would be about where the top of that skull is. So from the top of the pumpkin is the same as half this. Just little sight measurements and comparisons. That'll tell me how high up to make that. And I can tell I've already put my pumpkin too far over. So this is where I would draw lightly in the beginning. Do not be afraid to change your drawing. I'm just going to flip it over and start again real quick. I remember when I was in high school, my art teacher, Mrs. Wilson, would say, don't commit to that if it's wrong. For some reason we draw something, and if it's not right, we are afraid to erase it just because we've drawn it and we think it's right. Well, don't be afraid to erase it if it's wrong. I wanted to move that over a little bit, and then I've got my skull coming in. That'll fit better on the composition. So that's why we begin light. In the general shape here of the skull. Again, a simple size comparison. How about the width you know, if I took a measurement on the width of the pumpkin, it's about the same as the width of the skull. So do those size comparisons. Where's the bottom of the skull in relation to the pumpkin? It actually, this bottom part drops a little lower than the pumpkin, and you can see I don't quite have that yet on here. So I do want to angle that down and take it a little further so that it'll be a little lower. Again, sighting in angles. This angle right here is going to be pretty important. And then these angles of the corn stalks too. If you haven't studied perspective, you can always compare something that doesn't change. So the horizontal and vertical constant, those things don't change. So just make a comparison. You see it's all about angles. Just pay attention to the angle that those things make in comparison to a vertical. With a little bit of practice, you'll be able to sight those angles in really easily. And then I've got the kettle. How am I going to start that? Well, an easy way to start would be just to come right out from the side of where the pumpkin is, maybe tracing the contour of the pumpkin up, and then it starts right there. How high up does the spout come? Again, do a horizontal comparison across the whole entire format here. This is going to be about the height of the skull, so that tells me how high up that has to be, maybe a tad bit lower. And then I just continue mapping out the composition here. To begin with, don't let these corn stalks and stuff destroy your confidence. They're just really contours or lines. They're very easy to capture. If you just try to see them as contours and lines. Beginning to map this out. Got a little bit of a fold of the cloth here, and the angle of this cloth coming up this way. So you can see in the early stages of the drawing, don't worry too much about your detail or your light. You just want to begin with getting everything in the right place. That's the beginning of a decent composition. I think I would have rather offset it a little bit more to the left, or even zoomed in a little bit more. I originally intended this spout to be on the edge of the composition there, and the chin of the skull to be a little bit more towards that one, so it wouldn't be so centered, but it's going to be okay. So I hope that helps you get a good start. We'll talk about values and details in a few minutes, or next time. So pick 3, zoom in or draw big, estimate where stuff is going to land, pay particular close attention to your size relationships, proportion, and perspective, your angles. Don't be afraid to erase, draw lightly, move stuff around until you get it to where it's set, and don't bottom out to create your composition.